Hello, my name is Michaela Smith. The EDP PICO question that I'm analyzing and critiquing is about food safety. So the actual question was, to what extent do U.S. consumers follow techniques for hand sanitation that are associated with favorable food safety outcomes? So starting with the PICO breakdown of this, the P, which is the patient or the problem, the population patient that they were looking at was the U.S. consumers, so it was a very general study. They were looking at a wide variety of people. The problem was hand washing. They wanted to look at how people are washing their hands, if they're doing it right, all that sort of stuff. The I, which is the intervention, was very hard to determine. I don't think that there was an exact intervention that they were using. They weren't trying to determine between two products. They weren't saying, you guys do this and you guys do this, and then we'll figure out who did it better. They were honestly just looking. So I don't think that there was an intervention, and there might have been something else you could have used in that intervention spot, but I didn't find an actual intervention. The C, which is the comparison or the control of the study, was hand sanitation that's associated with favorable food safety outcomes. So how people are supposed to be washing their hands when they're dealing with food, how people are supposed to be washing their hands in general, but especially with food and food safety. The O, which is the outcome, there wasn't a direct outcome. They didn't say this is what we want to determine, this is what we're trying to figure out. I think it was more of just looking at everything and getting a general consensus of how people are washing their hands so that they know how to promote it in the future and they know if we need to improve it or not. So there wasn't one thing. I think they were just trying to get a general consensus of how people are washing their hands. So the inclusion criteria of this, the study was from January 2004 to May 2009. It was on human subjects, obviously, because it was on hand washing. English was the primary language. It was slightly international because in one of the studies they looked at Puerto Ricans, and so I don't know if they went to Puerto Rico for that, and that's why it's international, or if they looked at Puerto Ricans in the United States. I'm not 100% sure. So as far as sample size goes, they wanted a minimum of 10 subjects per study arm. So they did 5 separate studies underneath this big research study. So I think in each one of those they wanted at least 10 subjects. And obviously they had a preference for larger sizes because a larger population size gives you more accuracy and better results, more accurate results. So they obviously had a preference for larger sample sizes. They had a less than 20% dropout rate, which I think is pretty good. I think a lot of dropout rates are probably a lot higher than that. I know that in the research that I do, they send out 100 emails just to get 20 people back because a lot of people drop out even in the late stages of the study. So I think a less than 20% dropout rate is actually pretty good. Even though they probably wanted it lower, but. So, and then the people they were looking at was healthy people and people with an elevated risk of adverse outcomes from foodborne illness. So, pretty much everyone. People with elevated risk could be anyone from children to the elderly to pregnant women to people of childbearing age and healthy. So, pretty much everyone. They weren't looking at one specific, elderly people or Hispanic people. They were looking at everyone, U.S. consumers in general, which includes everyone. So it's a really big sample size that they had to select from. The overall conclusion of this study was there was moderate, consistent evidence that showed that U.S. consumers do not follow the recommended hand sanitation behaviors, which I'm sure they assumed. I didn't think that they would assume that people are washing their hands right or as much as they need to be. Which is what they found out. They don't follow the right hand sanitation behaviors, which I don't think a lot of them probably know the right hand sanitation behaviors. So that was the overall conclusion. This research project was given a grade of moderate, and in the grading scale it says that there could be a couple reasons it was given a moderate grade. It could have had a strong design, but it had minor concerns with the methods that they used in the study. There could have been inconsistencies among the results, or they were consistent and there was minor exceptions, which I think that's the category as to why this research study got a moderate grade, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But there also could have been doubts about adequacy of the sample size, doubts about the significance statistically and clinically of the study, and doubts about the generalizability of the study. So into the evidence and why it was probably the inconsistencies among results, there was 5 cross-sectional studies done, and they were all of neutral quality. All of the studies consistently showed that proper hand washing associated with food prep and bathroom use was far less than optimal, and it needs to be better improved and better promoted to everyone. So people weren't washing their hands right when they were preparing food, which is really sad to hear, because you don't want to hear that people who are preparing your food in the world aren't washing their hands. That's really gross. And also people during bathroom use weren't washing their hands, which is just as gross. So that was not where they wanted to be, and they need to promote it better is what they got from that pretty much. There was also 2 studies done of direct observation of hand washing behaviors and they did it of college kids and of Puerto Rican home cooks. I'm not really sure why they did just Puerto Rican home cooks, why they didn't do a bigger population, or why they did just that population, but the 2 studies of direct observation were of kids and Puerto Rican home cooks. And in those 2 observational studies, they found a very high degree of over-reporting of hand washing. So people were saying, yeah, I washed my hands this many times, when they really weren't, and they knew that because they were also observing them. So this self-reporting, I think, is why the research study got a grade of moderate. They called it social desirability in the study, and I think that means when they were asked, people didn't want to say, no, I didn't wash my hands. They don't want you to think of them as if, oh, they didn't wash their hands before they cooked my food. So they just said, yeah, I washed my hands, it's not a big deal, even when they really didn't. So it's called social desirability. So this self-reporting, I think, is what gave the research project a moderate grading. And even in the results, it said interpret with caution, solely because of the self-reporting, because you can never tell if people are telling the truth, and even if they really act like they are, they could have, accidentally said something different. So that self-reporting really, I think, is what led them to the moderate grade, was the inconsistency among the results, the difference between what people were telling them and what the observations were saying. So I think that was the overall evidence into why the grade was moderate. So that's it. My personal experience with this was that it was pretty interesting to look at and to read all the different information and try to analyze and critique it. It was pretty straightforward. The one part I had a difficulty with was breaking down the PICO question. I think especially that intervention, I just couldn't figure it out, because I really don't think that there was one. I really looked deeper down into the study, and I don't think there was an intervention. If there was, it was in the actual study where we can't see that, but everything else was pretty straightforward. The outcome wasn't direct, but I think you can assume what they were trying to accomplish and what they wanted the outcome to be. They just wanted to find a way to promote hand washing and to get a general consensus of how people are washing their hands. So the only issue I had was with that eye. I couldn't figure out what it was. That's because I honestly don't believe that there was one. So that's it. Thank you for listening to my critique.